The summer heat was relentless that year, making the old wooden barn feel like an oven, even in the late afternoon. I had been spending more and more time there lately, seeking refuge from the tension that had settled over our house like a thick fog. Mom had remarried 6 months ago, and with the marriage came Jake, my new stepbrother. At 17, Jake was 2 years older than me, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of emotions he never shared. We existed in the same space but moved around each other like planets in different orbits, never quite connecting. That particular Tuesday, I was sitting on an old hay bale in the far corner of the barn, sketching in my notebook. The barn had become my sanctuary, the one place where the blended family dynamics couldn't reach me, or so I thought. The creak of the heavy barn door made me jump, nearly dropping my charcoal pencil. "Emma?" Jake's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "What are you doing in here?" I quickly closed my sketchbook, my heart racing. "Nothing, just thinking." He walked toward me, his boots making soft sounds on the dirt floor. The afternoon light filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, casting stripes across his face. "Mom's been looking for you. Dinner's almost ready." "I'll be right in," I said, avoiding his eyes. But he didn't leave. Instead, he sat on a hay bale across from me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You've been coming out here a lot lately," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I shrugged, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. "It's quiet. Is that all it is?" Jake leaned forward slightly. "Or are you hiding from something?" I looked up, surprised by his perceptiveness. What would I be hiding from? He considered me for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe the same thing I am." The admission hung between us, fragile and unexpected. For the first time, I saw not just my stepbrother, the stranger who had invaded my home, but someone who might understand. "What are you hiding from?" I asked quietly. Jake looked away, toward the barn door, where the setting sun painted the horizon in shades of orange and pink. "My dad. Your mom. This whole situation." The honesty was disarming. I had assumed he was fine with everything, that he had adjusted better than I had. "You seem to handle it so well," I said. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's because I've had more practice. This isn't the first time my dad has remarried." I didn't know that. In the 6 months we'd been living together, we'd never really talked. Not really. "How many times?" I asked. 3 times before your mom." Jake shook his head. "I've stopped counting the number of step-siblings I've had." "That's awful," I said, meaning it. "It is what it is." He stood up and dusted off his jeans, but maybe this time could be different. I looked up at him, silhouetted against the bright barn doorway. "Different how?" He offered me a small, genuine smile, the first I'd ever seen from him. "Maybe we could actually try to be family, not just strangers living in the same house." Before I could respond, the sound of Mom calling our names drifted from the house. "We should go," Jake said, holding out a hand to help me up. I hesitated for just a second before taking it. His hand was warm and calloused from working on the farm. For a moment, something electric passed between us, a connection I hadn't expected and wasn't prepared for. "Dinner," I said, pulling my hand away and grabbing my sketchbook. "Right," he said, his voice back to its usual neutral tone. "Dinner." As we walked back to the house together, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The invisible wall that had stood between us for 6 months had developed a crack, and I wasn't sure whether to be excited or terrified by what might come through it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The conversation in the barn replayed in my mind, along with the unexpected warmth of Jake's hand in mine. I rolled over in bed, punching my pillow in frustration. Why was I thinking so much about my stepbrother? It was weird. It was wrong. But it wasn't just the physical contact that had affected me. It was the glimpse into his world, the realization that he was struggling with this new family dynamic just as much as I was, maybe more. The next morning at breakfast, the atmosphere was tense as usual. Mom and David, Jake's dad, were arguing quietly about finances, pretending we couldn't hear them. I focused on my cereal, trying to become invisible. "Emma has that art competition coming up," Mom said suddenly, changing the subject. "The one at the community center." David nodded politely. "That's wonderful. Jake, didn't you place in that photography contest last year?" Jake shrugged, not looking up from his phone. "Yeah." The conversation died again, and I felt the familiar discomfort settle in my stomach. This was what our family meals were like, a series of disconnected topics and awkward silences. After breakfast, I was heading out to the barn again when Jake stopped me in the hallway. "Can I see your sketches?" he asked, his voice low so our parents wouldn't hear. I clutched my sketchbook to my chest. "They're not very good." "I doubt that," he said. "I saw the one you were working on yesterday before you closed it. It looked amazing." I felt a blush creeping up my neck. "You did?" "Just a glimpse." He leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Why do you hide them?" "Because they're personal," I said defensively. "Art is meant to be seen, Emma." "Not all of it." I started to walk away, but he caught my arm gently. "Wait," he said. "I didn't mean to push. It's just, I get it. Having something that's just yours, something you don't want anyone else to see or judge." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "You do?" He nodded, releasing my arm. "More than you know." We stood there in the hallway for a moment, the air thick with unspoken understanding. "Maybe someday," I said finally. "I'll show you." "I'd like that," he replied, a genuine smile touching his lips. As I walked to the barn, my sketchbook tucked under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe this time could be different. The days that followed brought subtle changes in our relationship. Jake started waiting for me after school, walking the half-mile home together instead of me rushing ahead to avoid conversation. We discovered we both loved old movies, and spent a rainy Saturday afternoon watching black and white classics in the living room while our parents were out. "I can't believe you've never seen Casablanca," Jake said, tossing a piece of popcorn at me. I dodged it, laughing. "Not all of us can be film buffs." "There's nothing else to do in this town," he said, but his tone was lighter than usual. "Unless you count cow tipping." "Have you actually done that?" I asked, intrigued. "Once." The cow was not amused. He grinned, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I was getting used to that feeling around him, though I tried to ignore it. "Maybe we could go to the community pool tomorrow," I suggested, then immediately regretted it. It sounded too much like I was asking him on a date. But Jake just nodded. "Sure. I haven't been this year." The casual acceptance shouldn't have made me as happy as it did. The next day at the pool, I was acutely aware of Jake in a way I hadn't been before. The way the water droplets clung to his shoulders when he emerged from the pool, the easy grace with which he moved, the rare laugh that escaped when I accidentally splashed him. "You're getting burned," he said, noticing me rubbing my shoulders. "I forgot sunscreen," I admitted. He disappeared into the men's changing room and returned with a bottle of sunscreen. "Turn around." I hesitated, but the sting on my shoulders convinced me. I turned my back to him, trying to ignore the shiver that went through me as his hands made contact with my skin. "You're really fair," he said, his voice close to my ear. "You need to be more careful." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks for this. No problem." His hands lingered for a moment longer than necessary before pulling away. "All set." That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. My face was flushed, my eyes bright. I looked happy, and it scared me. The following week, Mom and David announced they were going away for the weekend to attend a wedding. "You two will be fine alone, right?" Mom asked, looking between Jake and me. "We'll be fine," Jake said, while I just nodded. But as Friday evening approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. We would have the house to ourselves for 2 whole days, no forced family dinners, no pretending everything was fine. Just us. Friday night we ordered pizza and watched another movie. This time it was a horror film that had me jumping at every sound. "You're scared," Jake teased as I practically climbed into his lap during a particularly intense scene. "I am not," I said, though my heart was pounding. "Right." He put his arm around me, and I didn't pull away. "It's just a movie, Emma." "I know," I said, but I leaned into his embrace anyway. When the movie ended, neither of us moved to get up. "You know," Jake said softly, "this is the most normal I've felt in a long time." "Me too," I admitted, my head resting on his shoulder. He shifted slightly, and I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Before I could analyze it, his phone buzzed. "Damn," he said, pulling away to check it. "It's my dad. They're staying an extra night." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Okay. Is that okay with you?" he asked, suddenly serious. "Me being here alone with you?" "Why wouldn't it be?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he was implying. "I don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Things have been different between us lately." "Different good or different bad?" I asked, my heart racing. He looked at me for a long moment. "Different good. definitely good. The relief that washed over me was so intense it almost made me dizzy. I had been so worried that I was misreading everything, that I was the only one feeling this strange connection growing between us. Good, I said softly. Jake stood up and held out a hand. Come on, I want to show you something. Curious, I took his hand and let him lead me up the stairs to his room. I had only been in there a few times and never for more than a minute. He closed the door behind us, then crossed to his closet and pulled down a box from the top shelf. What is it? I asked, sitting on his desk chair. My life before here, he said, setting the box on his bed. I don't usually show people this. He opened the box and pulled out a stack of photographs. The first one showed a younger Jake with a woman who had the same dark hair and eyes as him. My mom, he said quietly. She died when I was 10. I'm so sorry, I said, my heart aching for him. I didn't know. People don't usually ask. He shuffled through the photos. This was before my dad started collecting new families like some people collect stamps. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, but I wasn't sure how. She was beautiful, I said, looking at the photo. She was, he agreed. She loved art too. That's where I get it from. I looked up, surprised. You're an artist? Photography, he said, pulling out a portfolio case from under his bed. It's easier to hide than sketchbooks. He opened the portfolio, and I gasped. The photos were stunning, black and white images that captured emotion and light in ways I had only seen in professional galleries. Jake, these are incredible, I said, genuinely impressed. Why have you never shown anyone? Same reason you hide your sketches, he said simply. They're too personal. I understood completely. Art wasn't just about creating something beautiful. It was about revealing a part of yourself, making yourself vulnerable in a way that could be painful if not received well. Can I show you something? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He nodded, and I ran to my room to grab my sketchbook. When I returned, Jake was sitting on his bed, waiting patiently. I sat beside him, careful to leave some space between us, and opened the book to my favorite drawing, a detailed sketch of the barn at sunset, with the light filtering through the cracks, just as it had on that day when we had our first real conversation. Emma, Jake breathed, his fingers tracing the edge of the paper. You're so talented. Thank you, I said, my face growing warm. Most people just think it's doodling. It's not, he said firmly. It's seeing the world in a way others don't. Capturing something real. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us looking through each other's art. It felt intimate in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. You know, Jake said finally, we could work together sometime, your drawings, my photography. We could create something really amazing. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. As the evening wore on, we talked more than we ever had before. About our dreams, our fears, our pasts. I learned about his difficult relationship with his father, his struggles to fit in at each new school, his dream of becoming a professional photographer. I shared my own insecurities about my art, my worries about leaving for college in 2 years, my fear of never finding my place in this new family. At some point during our conversation, Jake had taken my hand, his thumb gently stroking my palm. I should have pulled away. We were step-siblings after all. But it felt too right, too natural to break the connection. Emma, he said softly, his eyes locked on mine. I know this is complicated. Our family's everything. It is, I agreed, my heart pounding. But I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it. The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and intoxicating. I think about you too, I confessed, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as they left my lips. Jake leaned closer, his eyes searching mine for permission. I didn't move away. I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it was gentle and tentative at first, then deepening with a hunger that mirrored my own. The world narrowed to this moment, to the feeling of his hand cupping my face, to the taste of his mouth on mine. We were crossing a line, I knew, a line that step-siblings weren't supposed to cross. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection I had been craving for months, finally realized. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily. Wow, Jake said, running a hand through his hair. I've wanted to do that for a while. Me too, I admitted, my face flushed. We need to be careful, he said seriously, about our parents, about school. I know, I said, though part of me wanted to shout it from the rooftops. But this, he said, taking my hand again, this feels right. It does, I agreed, and it did. Despite the complications, despite what anyone else might think, this felt more right than anything had in a long time. The next morning, I woke up with a smile on my face. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind, the conversation, the shared vulnerability, and most importantly, the kiss. When I went downstairs, Jake was already in the kitchen making pancakes. The domesticity of the scene made my heart ache with happiness. "Morning," he said, turning to smile at me. "Sleep well?" "Very," I said, accepting the plate he offered me. As we ate, we talked about everything and nothing, school, movies, our plans for the day. The easiness between us felt natural, as if we had been doing this for years rather than just a few days. "I was thinking," Jake said, pouring more syrup on his pancakes. "We could go out to the old mill today, take some photos, do some sketching." "Sounds perfect," I said, already mentally gathering my art supplies. After breakfast, we packed a lunch and headed out on Jake's bike, me riding on the handlebars like we were kids again. The wind whipped through my hair, and I laughed as Jake wobbled deliberately to tease me. The old mill was about 3 miles from our house, a relic from a time when the town had been a thriving industrial center, rather than the sleepy farming community it was now. We had the place to ourselves, the silence broken only by the sound of the water trickling over the old wheel. Jake set up his camera while I found a spot on the grass to sketch. For a while we worked in comfortable silence, each lost in our own creative world. "Can I photograph you?" Jake asked suddenly. I looked up, surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because you're beautiful," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And because the way you look when you're sketching, it's like you're in another world." I felt a blush creeping up my neck but nodded. "Okay." As Jake photographed me, I tried to focus on my sketchbook, but it was difficult with his eyes on me. There was something intimate about the way he looked through the lens, as if he were trying to capture not just my image but my essence. "Perfect," he said finally, lowering his camera. "That's the one." "Can I see?" I asked. He hesitated. "They're not developed yet. I still use film sometimes." "I'd like to see them when they're ready," I said. "I'll show you," he promised, sitting beside me in the grass. "What are you drawing?" "The mill," I said, showing him my sketch. "But it's not coming out right." "It looks amazing to me," he said, his shoulder brushing against mine. "You're too hard on yourself." "Maybe," I said, closing my sketchbook. "Or maybe I just need a different perspective." I turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation. The kiss was deep and passionate, filled with all the unspoken feelings that had been building between us for weeks. Jake's arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer until I was practically in his lap. We were so lost in the moment that we didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a voice said, "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" We broke apart quickly to find Mark Thompson and his friend standing a few feet away. Mark was a senior at our school, known for being a jerk and for spreading rumors like wildfire. "Nothing," Jake said, standing up and positioning himself slightly in front of me. "Just leaving." "I don't think so," Mark said with a smirk. "I think I need to tell everyone about the little step-sibling love affair I just witnessed." "It's not like that," I said, my heart pounding with fear and embarrassment. "Really?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "Looked pretty convincing to me." Jake stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Leave her out of this. Whatever problem you have is with me." "Oh, I don't have a problem," Mark said, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "But I think the whole school will find this very interesting." As Mark and his friends walked away laughing, I felt sick to my stomach. Our secret was out, and soon everyone would know. "We need to go," Jake said, taking my hand. Now, the ride home was silent and tense. I could feel Jake's anger radiating off him in waves, but beneath it, I sensed something else: fear. When we got back to the house, Jake immediately locked the door behind us. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Mark's an asshole. He's going to make sure everyone knows by Monday." "Maybe we can deny it," I suggested, though I knew it was hopeless. "Say he was mistaken." "Who's going to believe that?" Jake asked, his frustration evident. "We were caught, red-handed." I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. "Our parents are going to find out. Everyone at school is going to know." Jake sat beside me, taking my hand. "Hey, look at me." I looked up, my eyes filled with tears. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. "Together." "But how?" I asked, a tear escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. He gently wiped it away with his thumb. "I don't know yet, but we will. I promise." Despite his reassurance, I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of anxiety. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, convinced it was someone calling to ask about the rumor. Every car that drove by made me wonder if it was someone coming to confront us. Jake tried to distract me. We watched movies, played board games, even attempted to bake cookies, which ended in disaster. But the looming threat of Monday morning hung over us like a dark cloud. Sunday evening, as we were cleaning up the kitchen, Jake said, "We need to talk about what we're going to do when our parents get home." I nodded, my stomach clenching. "Do we tell them?" "I don't think we have a choice," he said. "If they hear it from someone else, it'll be worse." "But what if they make us stop seeing each other?" I asked, the thought sending a pang of fear through me. Jake took my hands in his. "Then we'll find a way around it." "But I'm not giving up on this, Emma, on us." The determination in his eyes gave me courage. "Okay," I said, "we'll tell them together." When Mom and David got home late Sunday evening, we were sitting in the living room, waiting. "Hey, you two," Mom said, dropping her bags by the door. "How was your weekend?" "Eventful," Jake said, exchanging a look with me. David noticed the tension immediately. "Everything okay?" Jake took a deep breath. "We need to tell you something." As Jake explained what had happened, our growing friendship, our feelings for each other, the kiss at the mill and Mark catching us, I watched our parents' expressions change from confusion to concern to something I couldn't quite identify. When Jake finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Mom spoke. "How long has this been going on?" "Just this weekend," I said quickly. "We just realized we had feelings for each other." David looked at Jake, his expression unreadable. "Jake, you know this is complicated." "I know," Jake said. "But it's not something we can just turn off." "And what happens at school?" Mom asked. "People are going to talk." "They already are," I admitted quietly. "Mark saw us. He's probably told everyone by now." Mom sighed, running a hand through her hair. "This is not what I expected when David and I got married." "None of us did," Jake said. "But it's happening, and we need to figure out how to deal with it." David stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. "You're not related by blood," he said finally. "That's something, I suppose." "But you're step-siblings," Mom said. "You live in the same house. What happens if this ends badly?" "We'll still have to see each other every day," I finished for her. "I know." Jake stood up and walked to stand beside his father. "Dad, I know this is weird, and I know you're worried, but Emma is. She's important to me, more important than anyone has been in a long time." The vulnerability in his voice surprised me, and I could see it affected David too. David put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "I just don't want to see either of you get hurt." "We won't," Jake said, though we both knew it was a promise he couldn't make. Mom looked at me, her expression softening. "Are you sure about this, Emma? About Jake?" I nodded, meeting her eyes. "I'm sure." Another long silence stretched between us. Finally, Mom sighed. "Okay, but we need rules. No closed doors, no staying out late together. And you need to be prepared for what people at school are going to say." "We understand," Jake said, relief evident in his voice. "And we need to talk about this more," David added. "All of us, but not tonight." It's been a long weekend. As our parents headed upstairs, Jake and I looked at each other, a mix of relief and apprehension passing between us. "That went better than I expected," Jake said, taking my hand. "Yeah," I agreed. "But tomorrow at school, we'll face it together," he promised, squeezing my hand gently. "No matter what." Monday morning arrived with a sense of dread. As Jake and I walked to school, I could feel eyes on us, whispers following us down the hallway. "Did you hear? They're step-siblings. So gross." I tried to ignore them, focusing on Jake's hand in mine, but it was hard not to let the judgment affect me. In first period, Mark made sure the whole class knew about us. "Hey, Jake," he called out. "How was your weekend with your sister?" Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "What's wrong?" Mark continued. "Cat got your tongue? Or were you too busy with Emma to talk?" "That's enough," Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. "Or what?" Mark challenged. "You'll sick your girlfriend on me?" Before Jake could respond, the teacher walked in, putting an end to the confrontation, but I could feel the weight of everyone's stares on me throughout the class. At lunch, we sat with a few of Jake's friends, who seemed uncomfortable but supportive. "So it's true?" Sarah asked, looking between us. Jake nodded, putting his arm around me. "It's true. And you're okay with this?" she asked, her tone more curious than judgmental. "We are," Jake said firmly. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers and stares. By the time the final bell rang, I was emotionally exhausted. "Hard day?" Jake asked as we walked home. "Understatement of the year," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "It'll get better," he promised. "People will find something else to talk about eventually." "I hope so," I said, though I wasn't convinced. When we got home, Mom was waiting for us in the kitchen. "How was school?" she asked, her expression concerned. "About as bad as expected," Jake said, dropping his backpack by the door. "I'm sorry," Mom said, looking at me. "If I had known this would happen—" "It's not your fault," I said, "and it's not like we planned this." "No," she agreed. "But we need to talk about how to handle it." For the next hour, we discussed strategies, ignoring the rumors, standing up for each other, talking to a counselor if things got too bad. It was strange having my mom help me navigate a relationship, especially one so complicated, but I was grateful for her support. That evening, as I was working on homework, there was a knock on my door. "Come in," I said, expecting it to be Mom. But it was Jake holding a small box. "What's this?" I asked as he sat on my bed. "Something for you," he said, handing me the box. I opened it to find a small silver necklace with a camera charm. "It's beautiful," I said, my eyes widening. "But you didn't have to. I wanted to," he said. "To remind you that no matter what anyone says, what we have is real, and it's worth fighting for." Tears welled in my eyes as he helped me put on the necklace. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He leaned in and kissed me gently. "We're in this together, Emma, always." The necklace became my talisman against the judgment of others. Whenever someone made a comment or gave me a dirty look, I would touch the camera charm and remember Jake's words. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely the gossip died down. Mark found a new target for his cruelty, and the school moved on to the next scandal. Jake and I settled into a comfortable routine, studying together, going on dates when our parents allowed, supporting each other through the ups and downs of high school life. Our relationship with our parents evolved too. They had set clear boundaries, but they also made an effort to understand what we had found in each other. Family dinners became less awkward, movie nights more genuine. We were becoming a real family, not just two separate households forced together. One evening in early spring, Jake and I were sitting in the barn, looking through his developed photos from the mill. "These are amazing," I said, studying the image of me sketching. "You really captured something." "That's because I was photographing someone I care about," he said, his arm around my shoulders. "It makes a difference." I looked at the photo more closely. There was something in my expression, a concentration, a peace, that I hadn't realized was there. "You know," I said, "I've been thinking about college applications." Jake tensed slightly. "Yeah? I want to apply to art schools," I said. "But I'm scared." "Scared of what?" he asked, turning to face me. "That I'm not good enough," I admitted. "That I'll fail." "Emma," he said, taking my hands, "you're the most talented person I know. You're going to be amazing." "But what about us?" I asked, the fear I had been suppressing finally surfacing. "What if we get into schools in different places?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll make it work. Long-distance visits, whatever it takes." "You really think we can?" I asked, searching his face. "I know we can," he said firmly, "because what we have isn't just some high school romance. It's real." As he leaned in to kiss me, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time, I felt like we could face it together. The following months were a whirlwind of college applications, senior events, and stolen moments together. We both got accepted to our first-choice schools. Me to the Rhode Island School of Design, Jake to NYU's photography program. They were only 3 hours apart, close enough for weekend visits but far enough to have our own college experiences. Graduation day was bittersweet. As we stood in our caps and gowns, surrounded by family and friends, I felt both excited for the future and sad to leave this chapter of our lives behind. "You ready for this?" Jake asked, taking my hand as we lined up to receive our diplomas. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said with a nervous laugh. "No matter what happens," he said, squeezing my hand. "Remember that we started in a barn, with two people who were too afraid to show each other their art. Look how far we've come." I smiled, my heart swelling with love for this boy who had seen me when I felt invisible. who had understood me when I felt misunderstood, who had loved me when I felt unlovable. "We have come far," I agreed, "and we're not done yet." As we walked across the stage to receive our diplomas, our hands still clasped together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had crossed lines that step-siblings weren't supposed to cross, but in doing so, we had found something rare and precious, a love that had grown from friendship, built on trust and understanding, strong enough to withstand judgment and distance. That summer, as we prepared to leave for college, Jake and I spent one last evening in the barn where it all began. "Remember when you found me here?" I asked, sitting on the same hay bale where we had our first real conversation. "How could I forget?" Jake said, sitting beside me. "You were so determined to keep me out." "I was scared," I admitted, "of you, of this family, of change." "And now?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders. "Now I'm scared of losing this," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "Of losing us." "Never going to happen," he promised, kissing the top of my head. "We're stuck with each other." I laughed, the sound echoing in the familiar space. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said." "I have my moments," he said with a grin. As the sun set, casting the same golden light through the barn walls as it had that first day, I thought about how much had changed in just over a year. The boy who had been a stranger, an intruder in my home, had become my best friend, my confidant, my love. "You know," Jake said softly, "when my dad told me he was getting married again, I was so angry. I didn't want another step-family, more people to lose when it all fell apart again." "What changed?" I asked. "You," he said simply. "You were different. You weren't trying to be my sister or replace anyone. You were just you, and that was more than enough." Tears welled in my eyes as I thought about the lonely boy he had been, the walls he had built around himself, and how fortunate I was to have been the one to see past them. "You are more than enough, too," I said, turning to face him. "You are more than enough." As he leaned in to kiss me, I felt the same electricity I had felt the first time, the same sense that we were crossing a line we weren't supposed to cross. But now, I didn't care about the lines or the rules or what anyone else thought. All that mattered was this connection, this love that had grown in the most unexpected of places. We had crossed every line, yes, but in doing so we had found ourselves in each other. And as we sat there in the fading light, I knew that our story was just beginning.